Energy media readers, today we're going to be talking about a buzzword that's floating around the Alberta oil patch, and that is ESG, and it stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. It's a big issue, especially when it comes to the allocation of capital these days. And to discuss this, I've got Amy Stutzman, who is an analyst out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Welcome to the interview, Amy.
Thank you, Markham. Thanks for having me.
Well, look, maybe let's start with just a brief overview of exactly what ESG is.
Sure. So ESG, that for those of you that don't know, that stands for environmental, social, and governance. And this is really just, it's a platform, a way for companies to get organized and start looking at these issues in a holistic manner. So to me, it's kind of refining our view of these issues and getting organized around what are our goals in regards to these specific issues, and how then are we going to track our performance and are we reaching our goals, and then how are we reporting that out to our investors to better tell our story. So I don't necessarily think any of these issues are new, right? Because in our energy industry, we've been talking about environmental impacts for years, right? So it's just, how do we better track and tell the story to our investors?
Yeah, from what I've talked to other investors about this, they say the issue here is managing risk. It's risk mitigation for the investors. They don't want to be caught with a company that has high emissions or poor environmental record, or there's some other thing lurking in the background that could endanger their investment. Is that a fair way of describing why there's more interest these days?
Yeah, I think that just over time, gradually, the culture has changed, right? And there's a lot of discussion now in particular about millennial investors, and they're getting more involved. But just in general, I think our culture has changed. So not that we've historically not cared about these issues, right? But they're now just more of a focus in addition to financial performance.
Now, one of the big focuses of ESG these days is greenhouse gas emissions, and it's particularly important for investors because governments around the world are implementing climate policy. Climate policy adds cost, and therefore it increases risk. Are you seeing that in the U.S. and ESG circles with the concern around emissions?
Yeah, certainly. That's definitely one of the issues that is top of mind for the energy industry. And I'm seeing companies are, there's a lot of, I'd say, working groups that are being created to talk about how are we going to address these, and how are we collectively going to track our progress around these particular issues. So when you look at what's happening in the U.S., like here we have the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and they've already promulgated some guidance specific to oil and gas companies, and some of the things that they're talking about tracking and ways to track in particular is this greenhouse gas emissions for sure.
Yeah, I think everybody in the industry is aware of the BlackRock Inc.'s CEO Larry Fink's letter of mid-January, where he basically said, going forward, we are climate policy, climate risk is going to be a significant determinant of whether or not we invest in a particular company. Are there any, and I guess I see the big companies taking action. Some of the little companies are a little slower. How will it affect, like in the U.S., the shale basin companies, like in the Permian, where you've got a lot of gas flared, for instance?
Yeah, so gas flare, that's definitely another issue, right? That they're talking about tracking, and when you look at some of the other standards and the guidance that's already out there, we're starting to talk about ways and how are we going to track this and report this out. And you already have companies out in the Permian. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Parsley Energy, right? They've come out and been pretty vocal about what they're going to do to reduce flaring and what their goals are around that in their sustainability reports and in their investor presentations and meetings.
Final
definitely
question,
top of
Amy.
mind.
Where do you see this, the trends going over the next couple, say 2 to 5 years around ESG?
So I think that you're going to see more working groups being formed specific to the various sectors of the energy industry, upstream, midstream, downstreams, where you're going to have more collaboration on as an industry as a whole, how are we going to address these issues? How are we going to come to some standards of how we're going to be reporting this information to our investors so that they can start to receive more robust information that can be compared, that they can actually use to make their investment decisions.
Amy, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it. We'll look forward to chatting with you more in the future about this topic.
Yep. Thank you, Markham.